This is Daniel Malloy. It's 10:08 in the morning on June 14th, 2022. So, Mr. Dulac, how long have you been dead?
The year was 1910, New Orleans. I was being hunted, and I was completely unaware it was happening.
Please, help me!
Anne Rice's vampires are the most human monsters in literature.
I'm such a fan of Anne Rice's work, this world that she created, so I put a lot of pressure on myself to fulfill Lestat's shoes, which are mighty.
This is not a life! That's because you took my life!
There's one thing I really want to do, which is play a vampire. They go, no, you're not going to be a vampire. They're talking about you being the interviewer. Do-over.
The action, the period piece, be prepared to be wowed.
This is the show that finally says vampires are real.
So, Mr. Dulac, how long have you been dead?
Hey, Mark.
We're making this show for AMC based on Anne Rice's books, starting, of course, with Interview with the Vampire. I probably read it for the first time about 20 years ago. She satisfies on so many levels. She's just damn exciting to read. She's scary as hell. But the books all deal with grand themes. This show is a confluence of Anne Rice and Roland Jones, which I think is a really happy marriage.
I was doing an overall with AMC, and you come in and you have like a nice meeting with all the executives, and on the way out, one of them goes, and you know, we're probably not going to be interested in this, so we bought all the Anne Rice books. And I was like, like right at the door, and then I came back and I said, I really want to do this.
I'd always loved the book, and I got a call to meet with Roland and with Mark Johnson, where we just talked about Anne Rice and vampires, and it seemed to all be on the same page about what we were excited about.
Help me, please. He's in my head, Father.
My excitement about the original novel is still there. The key thing for me was that Anne Rice managed to make you feel that whatever else you'd heard about vampires, you were finally getting the truth, finally hearing the real story about vampirism.
I think she's really less interested in the vamp powers and more about the idea, the burden of existence and enduring, and what the accumulation of loss and regret does to you, and how do you pick yourself up. There was a death of her daughter that occurred, and I think she wrote this out of a response to that, and you can feel it in all of the pages woven in, a depth of feeling and loss and mourning.
I was the last sunrise I ever saw. Perhaps the kindest thing the dark gift has given me.
Interview with the Vampire starts with a mysterious man explaining to a journalist the story of his life.
This is Louis de Pontelac, who's being interviewed by Daniel Malloy, and Louis tells the tale of how a vampire named Lestat came to New Orleans, turned him into a vampire.
They were your brothers and sisters once, but now they're your savory inferiors.
I don't read this as just a vampire novel, and I didn't sell it as a horror show.
Lestat has very powerful feelings for Louis. Their relationship is the key to the whole thing, and for better or worse, because their relationship is beautiful and ghastly.
So why are we reimagining this story? Well, I think, like any great piece of art, every generation or every few generations wants to reckon with it in a new way. And this is a rigorous and honest engagement with the source material.
And the one thing you have to know is you have to get down to what is at the core of these books, and you cannot disrupt that.
I need to go home.
I tried to always put Anne in the room with us. And the idea when we would pivot, we would just try to go, well, try to imagine ourselves in 1973 writing this book, and now put that same writer into 2020, and you have a network that says, hey, make this a television show. The novel is out there. Fans will always have the novel. That movie in 1994, very popular with a lot of people, always there. AMC tasked me with trying to make this third thing.
The year was 1910.
If you're going to have all this gothic romance from the 1800s, you're going to move that out. What's another sexy, exciting time period for New Orleans? It seemed very clear to me that the next really hot moment was when jazz was coming up. It's New Orleans. It wasn't really hard to say, why don't we make Louis Black Creole? We've kept all the plot. It's all there. But how we get to these big plot points are changed and are altered by those two changes that we fundamentally made.
Louis is the one that sort of takes you over the threshold of telling you the story of what it's like to be human, to have the feelings that we all have about being human, which was one of the main stories I wanted to be able to tell, was just sort of the initial stages by which Louis is brought into this new vampire life.
We take a little bit more time with that because, the first episode's a lot about what you give up to become a vampire.
There's questions of good and evil, dealing with alienation and even loneliness, even when you're with somebody. And the more you know the characters, the more you feel for their triumphs or their failures.
You think you know who you are, and coming out the other way and go, who was I? That's what this show is about, picking away at that. Stay with us, stick with us. You're going to see that this is the show that finally says vampires are real. It's a great goddamn yarn, is what it is.
First question. You weren't always a vampire, were you? No.
I executive produced a number of things for AMC, from Breaking Bad to Better Call Saul to Rectify and Halt and Catch Fire. And if there's something in common about all of them, it's characters. And AMC embraces characters, and that's what Anne Rice has in spades.
We went out really wide on all of these roles, and I kind of knew as I was writing it that there might be an advantage to London theater training.
It was particularly difficult and compounded because we were casting in the age of the pandemic.
Where we were doing chemistry reads on Zoom, we were literally the opposite sides of the world.
There was lots of different time zones. It was usually at like 3 o'clock in the morning for me in Australia.
Some things you don't get about America, Lestat. Yes, let's have this conversation again.
Roland and I were in LA in our office at 6 in the morning, whatever it was. It was just a very bizarre way to go about things, but it worked. We got our guys.
Gentlemen, well, you all know Louis Delac. Louis, let me introduce you to Mr. Lestat de Liancourt.
Lestat's come from Europe. He's arrived in America to try and live out a full human life. So he's come to New Orleans to basically set up his own kingdom. He's here to live the way he wants to live, with music and sex and partying and freedom. He's very arrogant, he's very vain, he's brash. He knows how to behave in certain situations. He knows how to purposely misbehave in certain situations.
I mean, Lestat is charming as hell, man. Just somebody you kind of want to hang out with, you know what I mean?
One thing I think that was very important to everyone was that this version of Lestat isn't necessarily just the version from the first book.
The Lestat in this book is very different than the Lestat in this book and all the rest of the books that go forward after that. The idea of the charming vampire, the brat prince, does not exist in this book. And, Anne, I think, had 9 years in between that book and this book. And it's very clear that she sort of fell in love with Lestat.
He is hot-headed and violent.
How can you humiliate yourself like this?
Excited about the challenge, but also just terrified of what an undertaking this was going to be to live up to Louis de Pontdelac.
Why we ended up with Jacob was there was this sort of seething humanity. He's really kind. You instantly liked him because he's going to make a series of questionable decisions along the way. And so Louis comes from money from the plantation that was in this book. His great-grandfather had that plantation, and it moved down third or fourth generation. And this time period, it was very difficult to be in the sugar business if you were a black man. So he actually makes this savvy move to go, where can I make money at this time? And what was good about this, that there was still sort of a gray area, there was a moral grayness to his work that I think he has to confront.
You were a pimp.
The product was desire, and it came in as many forms as there were ways to move it.
I think Louis is very confused about his identity. He's somebody that wears many different hats, and he's trying to juggle a family life, a business. He's got his siblings, his sexuality, his race, his family history. These things are all kind of contributing to him having a bit of an identity crisis.
Get on home, else I'll bleed you like a cochon, bro.
Louis is quite progressive for his time. The way that he dresses, the way that he presents himself, the way that he thinks about the world around him is kind of steps ahead. He doesn't quite belong in his time. And I think that would be a really attractive thing for a vampire, because vampires don't either. And I think that Lestat sees that Louis is almost like running away from his humanity.
The first time I laid eyes on you, I saw that sorrow. I can take away that sorrow, Louis.
The irony being that I think actually when he becomes a vampire is when he starts to reconnect to his humanity.
Claudia, she is brought in to our story as she was in the novel as a kind of gift from Lestat to Louis. Louis has made the heartbreaking realization that he's going to lose his family because they're going to age and die and go away, and he's never going to have a family of his own. And so Lestat makes an effort to create one for him.
Where's your mama?
The best thing in this book is Claudia.
Claudia is a 14-year-old girl, and she gets turned into a vampire and then has to deal with being stuck for the rest of her life as her mind matures and she becomes a woman.
As Anne Rice wrote her, she was a young child, a 5 or 6-year-old child.
I think aging Claudia up is a super smart decision. For her being stuck at that age, there's a lot of turmoil and how is she going to find companionship and how is she going to grow? You're stuck between being an adolescent and a child and between adulthood.
She can never have a family. She can never have babies. So it's just absolutely heartbreaking.
Beauty of Claudia, she's a teenage girl, but she also is a vampire. But she still has crushes and wants to stay out late.
When Claudia first becomes a vampire, everything's new to her and exciting. When she's going for her first kill, she's feeling everything and it's so euphoric.
You're not a girl,
She's not thinking of what she's doing. She's just like, I need to eat, because everything is heightened for her because she is 14.
I'm so hungry. I think I'm gonna die.
They're essentially, they're a family of murderers. So I think there's something a little bit uncomfortable about the whole situation, obviously. But then I think there is a real love.
What is funny, I suppose, is the domestic nature of 3 monsters trying to live what they assume to be a sort of normal existence.
No running, young lady.
The dynamic between them is great. It's some of my favorite material in this series is the family, and both the loving moments between them and the hateful moments between them. It's a way to look at human behavior, family behavior, and just blow the lid off it.
When it came to who is a journalist that has the capability to push a character who's far more powerful than him, we couldn't be prouder that it is Eric Bogosian, who I think Rollin would say was who he always had in mind for it.
The day before they called me for this role, I was thinking, there's one thing that I've yet to do that's in my bucket list, which is play a vampire. So the next day I get the call and I'm like, whoa, okay. And I call them up, they go, no, you're not gonna be a vampire. They're talking about you being the interviewer. I gotta call you back.
We wanted to put a meatier, more aggressive journalist in the room to ask some questions. But we also, first and foremost, wanted to revere what Anne had made. So we were like, oh, well, what if it's the same guy?
Now it's over 40 years later, and Daniel is been invited to interview again.
You've grown old, Daniel.
Yeah, well, mortality beats a heavy drum. He's got some mileage on his treads, and he's also not well.
You have Parkinson's disease, Daniel.
Yeah. This interview allows him to go back and maybe grab the brass ring one last time. A do-over. I have to keep in mind that this guy almost killed me 40-something years ago. He takes that fear and he turns it into anger. So the more scared he is, the more angry he can get. I'm not that kid that you talked to 40-something years ago.
I think best we start when our boys had a rest.
I'm not your fucking boy. I'm an old man with all the triggers that come with it. And I'm ready.
They met in San Francisco in 1973. I think they had this interview. And I think 50 years later, they're having this interview.
One of the delights about doing this show is that it's a love letter to New Orleans as much as to vampires. And I think Anne Rice's affection for the city, informed her take on the whole thing.
The interesting thing about Anne Rice is not only was she this huge literary figure, but in the city of New Orleans, she actually did a lot for preservation, just to maintain as much historical texture in the city as she possibly could. Often Anne would go to these places and just spend time just immersing herself in these historic homes and museums, and it's in there, like it's in the pages, it's in the word. We're shooting at Gallier House. It's what Anne Rice wrote as Lestat's house in the novels, and so it's really exciting to be able to keep that connection to the books.
This world, this universe, and this character that Anne created speaks directly to the heart of this city. We shot a scene the other day where it's actually a direct quote of Anne Rice, where Lestat is talking about New Orleans, and he says, "There's not an inch of this city that wasn't built from the fierce wilderness that surrounds it."
New Orleans is very much a part of the romanticism of Anne Rice's books. It really serves that kind of magical, fantastical storytelling. And it does feel like a place where vampires live.
I produced a number of big movies. This is as big as any of those.
The production design, it's breathtaking. It is thorough, all the way down to the very last detail.
We set it in a part of New Orleans that doesn't exist anymore. Storyville was the section that was next to the French Quarter. That was the wild section. It was really one of the first times in American history where we had a really sort of a red light district. And it was a rip-roaring time.
Storyville was a crazy social experiment in New Orleans. It started right at the turn of the century and it was over by 1917. And they allowed prostitution in a very small 40-block square of the city.
When you walk onto these sets, it's as if you're going into 1920s New Orleans.
Oh, it's much bigger than I imagined it to be. This is big in terms of sets, and our back lot, which is a true back lot. It's almost like the ones they used to have in the studio lots in the heyday of Hollywood.
There's a couple buildings here that are exact replicas of buildings that used to exist on Basin Street in Storyville. This is the exterior of our Fair Play. We had our great sculptor, Brent, build the entablature with the woman above, and that's actually a detail from a building in Storyville that we found and reproduced. We're actually standing outside of the stage set of Lestat's townhouse. It is an exact match for our location at 1132 Royal. We replicated the fluted columns with the Corinthian capitals, and we had our sculptors recreate the iconic iron doors that are the entryway to the vestibule. So we're in Lestat's townhouse, and we really wanted to avoid some of the design cliche of vampire and get away from the burgundies and the blacks and the things that we kind of historically associate with vampires. For me, it was really important to have like a vampire design aesthetic and what it means to live in a space that's been curated by a vampire, especially someone who is as vivacious as Lestat is.
So this is the dining room. Nothing good ever happens in here. Nothing positive.
This is probably one of my favorite rooms, actually.
And we wanted to pay an homage to vampire lore and filmmaking. And so the candlestick that gets pulled and the bookcase opening. So we wanted to have secret panels for the coffin room. So we needed a way to open those secret panels, and we designed that into the mantle of the fireplace so that you activate this little push button, and then the built-in wood panels of the bedroom, which also have our Art Nouveau embellishment, swing open, and it reveals the coffin room inside. Claudia's room, we actually do the gag with the lamp where you twist the lamp and her bed is actually a lazy Susan that turns around and there is a coffin inside. Trying to use vampire logic of what I'd want in my secret coffin room, and that would be, how do you know if it's daylight outside? And so we added these beautiful reproduction Nouveau peepholes so that we could open them and see if it was sunny out or not.
She's so considerate of what we might need, what we might be looking at, what we might want to touch. There's something really tangible about the way she designs. But inside these boxes, there are tons and tons of incredible items.
This is the amount of detail in the show. The original Fair Play matches, and it becomes the Azalea.
Security equipment for the penthouse.
It's the only chest set. And is this the one that I threw across the room?
Yeah, and it's surprising they didn't break.
So this is just a box of voodoo dolls. This scared the shit out of me, this one. Sometimes it's just better to not know.
It has been so grand and so epic. So many big scenes with so many people, and we've got a lot of amazing real period clothing that is coming from all over. But because our leads are vampires, they are rough on their clothes. So many dresses made, so many suits made, all of their shoes. We make a lot. We really kind of turned up the color for Louis. And when you meet him in this, and he pops out in this golden, it's just beautiful.
I'd get out of the car and people would be like, damn, ooh, look at this suit. Like people were like going crazy over my suits.
The costume helps the actor in so many ways. So one of the things that was a real challenge was making sure that every single detail was just right. And I spent months researching so that you really feel you're in that time. And then your characters can be who they need to be on top of it.
Lestat really is a man from the 1700s. So in terms of the costume, when we first meet him, he's still wearing elements of that.
This was a coat that we designed for him to land in, and a lot of texture and a lot of wear there, and a little bit of elegance in that lining. You know, when you get a pop of that, it's like, oh.
Carol has done an extraordinary job of really keeping elements of bondage in his costume that I think are really fun to walk around in.
The red cloak that I wear was definitely like, I remember walking outside and everyone was like, holy cow. And I was like, I know, right? It's so great.
When people see this show, they're gonna really flip out and fall in love with every aspect of it and the way it looks and the way it sounds. The music alone is amazing, and the acting and the costumes and the hair and the makeup and the production design. Everything about it feels authentic, and you buy the universe 100%.
As if I had walked my entire life as a dead man.
I know that I've always loved the vampires as characters, as creatures who scared me from remember at an early age reading Bram Stoker. There's something so sort of deliciously scary about them.
I think people really love just vampires and vampire stories because it shows us the dark nature of ourselves.
It's like this funhouse mirror reflection on our own mortal lives and things that we all think about.
Everyone feels like they sort of know the vampire mythology, but there's a lot of variation.
We look at Nosferatu, we look at Bela Lugosi's Dracula, Frank Langella's Dracula, so many different versions of vampire. But I think what's different about Anne Rice than a lot of other vampire things is the humanity of it all.
In terms of the look of our vampires, we made decisions earlier on which are right out of the Anne Rice mythology, that they are not monstrous, they're not terrifying to look at. Their look is a sort of a heightened human beauty.
I don't want to make them pale. I don't want to make them veiny. I don't want to give them a crazy forehead, because how would they integrate into the real world? Everybody would be running away from them, but instead we went the other way and made him look perfect in every way.
Well, the eyes are described, very beautifully in the novels, and we've been very true to the descriptions that we were given.
Each of our vampires has special contact lenses that they wear, and they each have their own color. Louis, he has these bright green eyes. Lestat, his eyes are a beautiful pale gray. And Claudia has these amber orange eyes that are like pop.
When I looked in the mirror and saw my lenses, I can creep people out. Like, I have that power.
And they have different contact lenses for different moods and different levels of arousal and of ferocity.
When they attack, their pupils dilate really big, so we have separate contacts for that.
People look at you funny, and you're like, why are people looking at me like this? And you forget that you haven't blinked for 4 minutes because there's no air going into your eyes.
Well, one of the things we're doing differently in the show is that the vampires don't always have their fangs. And it depends on their mood. So we have like what we call resting fangs. We have attack fangs. We have a lot of different fangs. We made hundreds and hundreds of teeth for these guys.
There's 3 different lengths, and there are slip-on caps that click in.
So obviously when they're about to eat, that's when their fangs appear, and that will be a combination of us and digital effects.
Claudia has 4 fangs, and the standard is 2. Our tongues are not used to wearing fangs, so that was a little bit awkward.
It took a while to practice learning how to speak with a full set of dentures in.
Claudia, Lestat, and Louis, we have a set of full bridges for attack mode.
Were your parents this hour? No! Don't!
The fingernails have a big part of the Anne Rice lore, and the way they're described. There's a sheen to them. They're extended. They're slightly pointed. They're also useful as weapons, but they're beautiful.
We didn't want claws on them. We wanted them very slight, but yet they looked like they were razor sharp.
The nails are really fun, especially for Claudia. One of the scenes is admiring her nails. So even the way Claudia kills, I always like to remember the nails. Like, these are my nails. I'm going to kill with these.
You're wondering if your nails will be like that forever. And the answer is yes.
I'll tell you, the biggest struggle is keeping the nails on. First brought in somebody to do all their nails like once a week, but then nails would fall off, and then we'd have to glue them on set.
Jacob, he has these press-on nails, whereas Sam, he's agreed to get acrylics made. We have a nail person, a specialist, come in and do acrylic nails on him and also on Bailey.
The only reason I don't wear the acrylic nails is because I have a young daughter and I have to change her nappy and give her cuddles, and I don't want to scratch her.
We put them through a lot, Having sticky blood on you is a horrible thing. I mean, imagine if you just covered yourself in honey all day long. So we had gallons and gallons and gallons of vampire blood, dressing blood, mouth blood, gel blood, the whole thing. And then we had all the human blood, which we spilled all over the place, tons and tons of blood. And then we also had these big giant puddles of blood that were synthetic, just like mats, like a doormat, but they're in the shape of a giant puddle, and we had all different sizes.
Right down here is our blood kit that we carry to set, and we have different kinds of blood, like gel blood, which is just kind of a solid blood. Some low light blood, so it's like, because we're in the dark a lot. This is pumping blood, so I usually hook up a tube and
Yeah, there's a lot of blood in the show. They're actually cocktailing something right now that we're going to use in episode 7, and we're actually going to be drinking it, and we're taste testing it to make sure we like it. And there's like hibiscus in it, but it looks like blood.
The drinkable blood is very sugary, so you get this kind of like high from it, which probably not as intense a high as vampires get from drinking real blood, but there's something.
We live off the blood of the living.
out the back I have a fire extinguisher loaded with blood, so I hook that up to my hoses. That's probably 2 gallons worth of blood right there.
And then we'd go crazy and just like Kill Bill it all over the place. We wanted it to be like, boom. And one of the things we had to be concerned about is that we were shooting in locations that are like 150 years old in New Orleans. There's a sequence in episode 1, we just annihilate a bunch of people in there. And we're shooting in this church, and I'm like, okay, we've got to be really, really careful. The second the blood hit the floor, we finished shooting it, we cleaned it right up.
It's no easy feat acting with fake blood in your mouth and fake teeth that you can't chomp down on, and with contact lenses where you can barely see, and then have to deliver a beautiful, heartfelt performance.
This is not a life! That's because you took my life!
The cast never complained about it, and they always took it on beautifully because they all saw Special, and makes the show that much more exciting to watch.
The beauty of Anne Rice's characters is that they aren't creatures. They are us. They feel the same way we do, and they don't quite know where they belong in the world. I think that a lot of alienated people can identify with that.
She's really empathetic and says it's okay to be a little bit different. It's okay to be feared by others. It's okay to have these questions about yourself.
I think there was a very big female population. I think there's a very big LGBT population who really captured from the book this feeling that there wasn't a judgment for people who had feelings for one another, who were of the same sex.
She really had an impact on my life. It was the first queer book, mainstream book, that I had read. And I remember reading it and being so surprised by it. As I was like 15, and I was like, oh my gosh, they're in love. And that was a very big deal to me. And I'm very glad to be a part of this show.
We're all in love with Anne Rice's stories and the questions that she asks in her books and through her characters.
Why do you do this, Lestat?
Well, I like to do it. I enjoy it.
Well, I don't.
It feels like holding this kind of very precious thing every day.
You know, Anne passed away while we were shooting this.
When we found out that Anne Rice passed away, it was certainly something that all of us immediately felt. And the mood the next day feeling particularly heavy. I think especially for the city of New Orleans, she is an icon here, and this city has a lot to thank her for.
It's a great tragedy. It's a huge literary loss. I actually went down to the Garden District bookshop that day and went and spoke to people who knew her and who often threw her book openings, and went through their old photographs of Anne Rice turning up to her book signings and book openings in a coffin in a bridal dress. And this was an extraordinary person who made a huge impact on a lot of people's lives.
I would have liked to have thanked her, because when I read Interview with the Vampire, I felt understood on some level. I felt spoken to, and I felt comforted by how she writes.
On the morning of our next shoot day, Roland read a really beautiful passage from the beginning of the book and really spoke to the legacy that she has built.
I think we carry that legacy as a great responsibility and with a huge amount of respect.
She's the reason that we're here getting to tell this beautiful story.
It really was a wonderful moment for everyone to come together and pay respect to her.
The thing that felt different after that was you really got a sense then that it was on us after that. She wasn't going to be able to write any more words. So the canon is now set.
And for her to not be able to see all of these wonderful characters come to life again, I think is something that really sits with all of us and something that we feel even more of a responsibility over, creating something that hopefully the fans and people who appreciate her will continue to do so.
I think every author loves their writing first. If a movie or a TV show gets people to go back and look at it again, that's as honored as you can get. So I think it's certainly, it would be something that would make her happy to think that a really nice manifestation of her books will get people to go back to her books.
I think she was a significant American writer, and I think she has a bunch of people out there who this book is the book for them. This thing means the world to them. And I think there's a couple of generations that don't know it like that. And we're hoping that that'll happen again.
We're making this show for a lot of people who've never read Anne Rice, perhaps have never even heard of Anne Rice. So it has to satisfy them, but most importantly, they're the readers. You have to get the core right. The spirit of the books has to be true, and I believe we got it right.
I think fans should be most excited about diving into the Anne Rice world and this amazing, beautiful world that Rollin has created in this adaptation.
I wasn't sure you'd remembered me. Your book makes no mention of our prior meeting.
What I would say to fellow Anne Rice fans is to trust us, because we all love her too, and stick with us. The thread of her storytelling is all the way through it.
People who have read these books closely, I think, will quite quickly figure out how much love and how much reverence we had for this book.
Mention vampires in one of those readers tend to call bullshit.
Have I hit a nerve?
We are going to have a number of Easter eggs, some pretty obvious, some only the keen viewer will be aware of.
I came to know Christ in a monastery. I wanted to be a priest.
There are other, Easter eggs connecting to other books and other vampires.
There's a character from Queen of the Damned that makes an appearance here.
The nice thing about how AMC is doing this is there are a few story threads from Anne Rice's world rising at the same time. So in Interview with the Vampire, we get to make a few references to the witches who are literally just down the block in our story.
Plenty of brooms down the street at the Mayfair Sisters home.
He's calling me a witch, Mama.
The Immortal Universe is a description of some of Anne Rice's books with interwoven and connected characters. We obviously have Interview with the Vampire, and on the heels of it is The Mayfair Witches. And that is starring Alexandra Daddario. It's a story about a woman, a doctor in San Francisco, who discovers that she's the 13th witch in a line of New Orleans witches and comes to New Orleans and has to deal with these disparate influences on her life. And we will develop beyond that.
Interview with the Vampire. Season 1 is such a wild ride. There's romance, there's backstabbing, there's killing. We have amazing stunt sequences. You get a little bit of everything.
And there's some very funny moments as well.
I'm a person who very much believes that all drama should have comedy and all comedy should have drama. And what I always say is somewhere in the middle, humanity lies.
But I think the humor's in Anne Rice as well. It's extreme stuff. And these are extreme feelings that they're feeling. It's gallows humor. You have to find the macabre funny. If we didn't laugh, we'd all be screwed, really.
it's compelling, and it's humanity, and it's beautiful. And I think that that's what people will be watching as they kill many, many, many people.
Whenever you're ready, Louis.
When you see this, this will be your new Interview with a Vampire. Like you'll get it, and you'll be like, there is no other Interview with a Vampire. There's this version, and that's that.
He's dead?
Yes, there is a lot of blood. Yes, there are a lot of really gross horror movie classic tropes, but there's a beating heart to this show.
That is the greatest part about this show. They're vampires. The emotions get wider and wider and wider.
One of the most satisfying moments for a producer, just standing back and just saying, oh my God, I had something to do with putting this together. And you just beam with pride. And this happened a lot on this show.
There's this book. So I really hope that the fans of these books and this world really see that we are bringing in all of the elements and that we can do them honestly and truthfully and as blatantly as she wanted.
I'm really excited for people to see it. There's nothing, I don't think there's anything else like this show.